All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jomo Stewart and crew here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. It is Tuesday, August 8th, just a little bit after 8 a.m. And we are here for the reconvene of the Energy for All Alaska Task Force. We are fortunate enough to have Ms. Phylicia Cicilio, a researcher from the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, here to give us a briefing on Railbelt decarbonization pathways that they've been studying. But before we do, if I could take just one moment, I would like to let my military project manager inform you all of coming events.
Good morning. So my name is Phylicia Cicilio, like Jomo mentioned, the military project manager. Something important coming up is the Alaska Defense Forum taking place on August 29th and 30th at the Westmark Hotel. We're bringing in military community members. A great mixture of both communities are coming together for this forum in partnership with FEDC, the Fairbanks North Star Borough, and the Association of Defense Communities. Fairbanks North Star Borough has been named a Great American Defense Community by the Association of Defense Communities, so this is a big opportunity for us. We do have about 30 seats left for the event, so if you are interested in participating, registration is $100, and you can find information at alaskadefenseforum.com.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, the military, though we don't like to think of them as an industry, are quite a major industry here in the state of Alaska and in our community. They make up about 10% or underpin about 10% of the statewide economy, about 10% of the Anchorage economy, but a full third of our own local economy. So it's a big deal. And making the most of that relationship offers a lot of promise for our state, our community and state, as well as, again, help secure our national defense. All right, well, without further ado, so reach out to Lisa for your tickets. There's also a few sponsorship opportunities as well. Again, just go ahead and reach out. All right, well, without further ado, Ms. Phylicia Cicilio, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. So my name is Phylicia Cicilio. Very brief about me. So I've been at the Alaska Center for Energy and Power at the University of Alaska Fairbanks for 3 years now. And before I was at ACEP, I got my PhD in electrical engineering at Oregon State University with a focus on power systems engineering. And within that, my work primarily focused on transmission planning. So this is a great direct spin-off from that. So today we'll be talking about ACEP's Railbelt Decarbonization Pathways Study. And so I am the lead on this project. And first off, I just want to get into like who is all working on this, because we have a quite large team. So at the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, there's a whole slew of folks that are contributing in large or small parts. In addition, we're working with 3 other organizations, the Alaska Microgrid Group, including Brian Rogers and Peter Asmuth, Information Insights, who are helping us with public engagement and surveys. And then we have Telos Energy, who are consultants advising us and assisting us with trying to be as state of the art and on top of what the industry is doing when we are implementing this project. And their part of this project has been funded through the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. In addition to all of those contributors, we have a technical advisory group who we meet with every other week for about an hour. And so we have lead engineers from each of the electric utilities and the Alaska Energy Authority and Railbelt Regional Coordination. And their role in this project is to provide data, review our work, and advise us on how we can make this as realistic and accurate as possible. However, they're not defining our scenarios or telling us what we should or should not be doing. They're just trying to help us make this as accurate as possible and provide all the data that's needed. And I'd like to acknowledge our funders. This is funded through the Arctic Regional Collaboration for Technology Innovation and Commercialization, called Arctic, which is through the Office of Naval Research, and is funded by the Alaska Economic Development Capital Funding. So for anyone who is not familiar, although I feel like this group would be mostly familiar with what is the Railbelt. So the diagram on the left is an image of the Railbelt. So the yellow lines are the transmission. The Railbelt runs from Homer up through Anchorage and Fairbanks through to Delta Junction. In this image, we're just highlighting where the electric utilities are. And then we also show what we're calling load regions. And I'll get into that a little bit later, into why we're classifying 3 different load regions for the rail belts. So the goal of this project is to explore and quantify system-wide pathways towards 100% Railbelt electric grid decarbonization in 2050. And so I want to highlight that we're talking about, we're just looking at the electric grid. And so we're not going to be getting into decarbonization of other sectors in this project, such as the heating or transportation sector. However, we are looking at an electrification of those sectors, such as installation of heat pumps or electric vehicles. How does the adoption of those technologies impact the load on the electric grid? So that in that way, we're incorporating other sectors, but we are just focusing on decarbonization of the electric grid. And we're not saying that 100% of all vehicles are going to be electric vehicles or anything like that.
So if I may,
yeah.
Sorry, miss. So just as a reminder to the gang, as ever, this is for your benefit. I do have the chat line open. It's being monitored. So if you have any questions or comments, you can post them there. Otherwise, you can just go ahead and take yourself off mute and fire away. I do have to apologize. We don't have both monitors running today, so I'm not able to see hand raising necessarily from the participants. So again, if you have a question or a comment, please do just go ahead and unmute yourself and carry away or fire away. So again, load regions as opposed to service areas. You'll just explore that difference. I assume it has a distinction.
Yes, we'll get into that a little bit later, if it's okay if I park that.
Yes, miss. Yes, miss. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so our goal for the outcomes of the project is to quantify the economic and reliability implications of the decarbonization scenarios. So meaning we're going to get down to rate analysis of what is the impact to rates, how much is this going to increase or decrease our individual electric bills, and reliability. So really there's like 3 tiers when you talk, like we'll call it like 3 legs of a stool. When you talk about transmission planning, you have sustainability, affordability, and reliability. And we're basically fixing to those tiers. We're going to ensure that all our scenarios are reliable and meet the draft Alaska reliability standards. And we're going to meet the 100% decarbonization goal. And then the affordability is really the variable in question that will kind of note how different these scenarios are. And so all this information will hopefully be useful for electric utilities and board members and anyone interested in Railbelt planning. So this is our timeline of modeling and analysis. Really, I just wanted to show this to show that. So we started in early 2022, and our goal is to end by 2024. And so each of these blocks show like a different component of the analysis. These purple blocks are more focused on kind of the economic side of the modeling piece. And then the yellow tan ones are more focused on the power system analysis, stability and reliability. So at the beginning of the project, we got into scenario development. We're deciding, look, what do we want our scenarios to focus on? And these scenarios are more like illustrative examples of potential pathways to 100% decarbonization. However, we're not saying that these are the most likely pathways. It's just more like an illustrative example and showing what would happen if you went down this path. So following the development of our scenarios, we got into resource assessment. So that's getting into like where are, say, wind, solar, tidal resources, and what's their availability and what's their kind of value to the grid. We also got into load forecasting for the entire rail belts. And so this is where we did get into identifying adoption trends for electric vehicles, heat pumps, and behind the meter like residential solar. Following that, you get into resource sizing. Is kind of doing like an optimal sizing of like how much should be where of what. And then economic dispatch, which is for every hour of the day in 2050, what resource is going to be generating electricity and what is the load at that hour. And so making sure that you have that load and generation balance at every hour of the day, and including having enough reserves available for any sudden loss of any single resource. And then following that, we'll get into rate analysis. In addition, in tandem with all this economic analysis, we get into power system analysis. So first, we are developing transmission models, which using a power system simulator, which is industry standard and used in the Railbelt called PSSC. It's just a software tool. And then from there, we determine transfer capacity analysis, which is determining based on the resources that we've said are in the Railbelt, what is the limit on those intertie lines between Fairbanks and Anchorage and Kenai, because it changes based on what the lines are physically and also what resources are on at any given point in time. Those limits will change. And then from there, we get into stability analysis. So that's making sure, say, frequency and voltage are stable, given different events that are commonly found to happen on the Railbelt. Violation of voltage and frequency limits will result in blackouts. And then contingency analysis, so assessing all potential commonly known outages that might happen and looking at how prepared is the system to basically ride through that event or not ride through that event. I mean, this is where we get into making sure that we're meeting the Alaska reliability standards, which are currently drafts, which will be formalized with the Electric Reliability Organization.
This appears quite robust and comprehensive. You probably said it right at the beginning. I'm sorry, I was distracted. Who's funding this?
It's the Office of Naval Research through, it's like a part of a project that they found called Arctic, which funds a lot of ACEP's work. And then in addition to Arctic, we also have State of Alaska Economic Development funding.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And the flip side of all the modeling analysis is getting all the work out to the public that we're working on, and also trying to get public feedback on what we're doing. So we had a project kickoff workshop back in May of 2022. I think some of the people on this call were a part of that. And that was getting into the original scenarios that we had considered and kind of starting to get feedback on that. And then we got more formal feedback through a survey that was in October, November. We've summarized the results of that survey, and that came out as a report in May or June. I think it was June. And then in addition, we've had some like spin-off reports that have some preliminary analysis that was completed that we could get out early, because we wanted to get out what we had that was publicly available, because we're working under multi-party NTAs. So we wanted to get out what we had as it was coming out, because the final report is going to be very large. So we did a resource assessment on hydro and pump storage hydro. And so that came out in a report in July. And then we have a preprint out on the load forecast. And then there'll be a presentation in September with information insights assisting us on that. And then the final report and presentation will be sometime mid-January of next year. And that's the completion of this project at this phase. You know, we always hope for future work, but at this moment, this is the plan.
Can we loiter here on that slide for just a moment?
Sure.
So I guess first things first, hopefully you'll have us on the list for when you do your presentation regarding the final report in January. It gives us something to look forward to, or February, whenever the actual report is available. And I would just remind members that we did have a presentation on certainly pumped hydro not too long ago. And so you can find that on our YouTube page, although I don't know. I don't know if that presentation we received will be as in-depth as the report you're probably doing.
I'm not sure.
Just so members can familiarize themselves. Okay. I would open up the floor. Do we have any questions at this juncture? Okay, seeing none, please, miss. Thank you. Or excuse me, doctor. Thank you.
Oh, you're good. So I wanted to share what the original scenarios were, which were back in 2022, what we were planning to do. We had a decentralized scenario, which focuses on like decentralized generation, customer-driven decarbonization, and trying to reach like the maximum amount of distributed energy resources. So that's like rooftop solar and other in-home devices that would contribute to grid electricity as possible. Another scenario was centralized low carbon generation. So this is kind of more of like what's typically done, where you have like an IPP that builds a very large wind farm and connects to the grid. So lots of sites that focus on that large scale aspect to it. And then an export project offtake. So this would be, say, we have a really large renewable or like wind or geothermal or something that's creating energy beyond what is needed in the Railbelt. And so that could be used, that excess energy could be used to create hydrogen or something like that and export that hydrogen as ammonia or LNG to other markets. So after the survey that was completed last fall, we took that feedback and we revised what we were going to focus on for scenarios. And so the results, the detailed results of what the feedback was is in this report. And so the outcomes of the new scenarios that we decided to go with was the export project offtake was not a favorite. And from a modeling perspective, it's also would require the most assumptions. So we've opted to remove the export project offtake in the project at this moment. And do more of combinations of the first two original scenarios, which is also feedback that we got, that we should be doing more combinations of things versus just more siloed scenarios. So our new scenarios is there's a high electrification focus. So this is somewhat similar to the decentralization scenario. However, we are including some large like utility scale wind and solar. And so for new resources on the grid, we're talking about new wind, new solar, and tidal and high electrification, which is a load forecast, which we'll get to in a minute. And then there was like three that kind of fit under what was centralized low carbon generation. So lots of new large generators. And so they focus on like a focus on three different technologies. However, all of them included wind and solar. So new hydro had new large hydro, wind and solar, moderate electrification. This also includes Owatonna, which depending on who you're talking to is or isn't on table, and there's been a lot of work in this space. We're trying to be technology agnostic, so we wanted to include it because it has been in the discussion for a long time. And then we have a diverse mix. This is just wind, solar, and tidal with moderate electrification. There isn't any new large hydro or nuclear, which is our next focus, which is a nuclear focus. So that includes, I believe we're doing small modular nuclear reactors and sizing those approximately to be able to replace natural gas and coal. And then also including wind and solar and moderate electrification. So those are our new scenarios that we are modeling.
If I may,
yeah.
I don't see geothermal. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, we looked into geothermal, but the best resources are significantly far away from the existing transmission system. So we decided not to include it. We could have, there would have, and there wasn't a lot of good information on to what level of transmission would be needed. So when we had to get into the realm of a lot of assumptions, where there's not a lot of great information out there, at least none that's publicly available that we can use, we opted to end up not including it.
Because I know Mount Spur is regularly in the news.
Yes, and we talked to some people who had different opinions on like how realistic that was or not realistic. And there was just in general, like not a lot of public information.
Fair enough. Thank you.
For our load forecast, we kind of had two load forecasts. one we called moderate adoption, so it's like moderate adoption of electrification. And so what we did was we followed current trends as much as we could, and used global, national, and other regional trends that were available to kind of follow what would adoption rates of electric vehicles, heat pumps, and like residential or commercial, like rooftop solar, would be up to 2050. And we assumed a minimal amount of like base load growth. So just like the normal load growth that happens outside of electrification. And so that moderate adoption load forecast was applied for those three scenarios: the new hydro, diverse mix, and nuclear focus. And then we had an aggressive adoption. So this is not following any current trends. We kind of use this as like a bookend illustrative example of kind of like a maximum plausible adoption of these technologies. So we said 90% of vehicles are going to be electric, 90% of homes are going to have heat pumps, and same for rooftop solar. Just to kind of give an example of like, what would this do to the electric grid to have such high rates of electrification? And similarly, the base load growth was minimal, like a little less than 1% a year. So these are the technologies, electrification technologies we focused on. So there you got the electric vehicle, the heat pump, and solar. And we looked at both residential and commercial for heat pumps and rooftop solar, which we call behind the meter solar. Anything very large would not be called behind the meter. Behind the meter is things for like it's like a couple kilowatt size is like behind the meter, something that would go on top of your house or on top of like a small commercial space.
Oh, and actually, I guess this would be a great moment to remind folks, we've had presentations on heat pumps. We just had one regarding analysis of heat pumps in the Arctic environment. So that's on record. That's in the YouTube archive, as well as we've had a couple of presentations regarding small scale and micro nuclear. So those are available as well. Thanks.
So now I'll get into these load regions that I mentioned before. So these load regions are important from a modeling perspective, and just like a resource integration perspective. So the northern region is just Golden Valley Electric. Our central region includes Matanuska and Chugach Electric, and then the Kenai Peninsula is just Homer Electric. And so they're grouped in this way because of the single transmission interties that connect the system at these points on the grid. So these are basically the pinch points of the system currently. And from when you are looking to integrate there's many technical challenges with integrating like large variable renewable resources. Being able to share power between regions, especially regions that have geographical diversity. So say like the wind in Fairbanks is blowing, but not in the Cook Inlet or vice versa. There's benefits you can get from geographical diversity of resources because it can help smooth out some variation, not all of it, but it can help a little bit. However, you have to be able to have like basically free-flowing power between those regions to really make use of that geographical diversity. And so these pinch points basically are the largest constraints, and they're included throughout the modeling along with lots of other things, but that's why we classified these load regions as what they are. And we know that the Railbelt utilities and some of their concept papers to DOE to get funding for transmission upgrades have also classified the Railbelt into these three load regions. Yeah. So then now I'm going to get into kind of like the base information that we used to calculate the adoption forecasts. So this is for vehicles. So we went through all the DMV records that we could find for the boroughs and communities along the Railbelt to get vehicle counts for each region. The population in Alaska has been quite flat. So we are assuming that from now to 2050, it also makes it easier for modeling, that there isn't going to be any significant growth in either vehicles or buildings, which aren't, it's not the best assumption, but that's what we opted to go for. So these vehicle counts are the counts that we're using for 2050. And so this is how we got to like percentage, like 90% of vehicles are going to be EVs. These are the numbers that we're using to get there.
And when you say over on the right where it says load region, and I've got for northern 94,234, what does that represent? Because of course it's different from the vehicle count on this slide.
So this would be the vehicle count for the northern region, which really is just Golden Valley, and Nenana. Nenana is included in there too.
Ah, okay, there we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
or the Fairbanks Borough and Nenana, sorry. Yeah, so those are vehicle counts per region.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you. As distinct from, again, these municipalities or specific cities. Okay, got it.
Yeah. And so as a whole, Railbelt, we estimate is like just shy of 500,000 vehicles. And then for our building stock, so we are just getting into residential and commercial. We didn't get into industrial buildings. We did, but we wanted to, but you got to do like a bunch, their integration of these technologies would most likely look differently or could look differently at industrial scale, which warrants a different type of forecasting and analysis. So we just focused on residential commercial. So we got this information from borough tax property data and the census, where property taxes, there is no property tax data like Healy, Cantwell, and Denali Park. And so that's where we got our residential commercial counts. And then similarly on the right, you can see the total number of the residential commercial buildings for the northern region, central region, and southern. So we're just shy of about 300,000 residential and commercial buildings in the Railbelt. This was used for the heat pump and behind the meter solar forecasts. So we'll get into our electric vehicle adoption trends. So we have historical numbers of electric vehicles. That's from the DMV. That's in yellow. And then we plotted that against forecasts developed by the Alaska Energy Authority. They have a continued and aggressive forecast. These only go up to 2026, but you can see they follow pretty directly the historical trends, just ones at a more aggressive rate. So used this information and extrapolated out the Alaska Energy Authority's forecasts out to 2050 using polynomial growth, and then decided to use, I'll get into comparisons in a minute, but when we decided to use AEA's aggressive adoption for our moderate forecast, and then our aggressive forecast is up to 90%. And so that's this dot up here. And this is in terms of number of Railbelt vehicles. That's our y-axis. So the next slide, yes, okay. It gets into, in terms of percent of vehicles on the Railbelt, what percentage are electric vehicles? And so this plot, so you can see like the aggressive is forecast is up at 90%. And then our moderate estimate for 2050 is around 70%. And we compared this to global and national trends. So Bloomberg is a global trend, provides a global trend for, I forget what the term is now, but is for like large markets like the United States, not emerging markets like in other developing countries. So Bloomberg provides an example of what they believe for large developed markets, adoption rates of electric vehicles. So you can see it's much higher than what we're forecasting. And then Larson provided national forecasts. So that's this orange dot, and it's just the 2030. Also higher. And then in comparison to other regions in the United States, we've provided the forecast for New England, provided by ISO New England, which is the balancing authority ISO for the New England states. So you can see that both AEA's forecasts, including what we went with, are both lower than both national and global trends, which does make sense because we have more like cold weather challenges associated with electric vehicles. So it does make sense that it would be less. However, that gave us justification to use IEA's aggressive forecast because it was still less than national and global trends. Next, I'll get into the heat pump forecast. So this chart is looking at forecasts that were available from New England states and provided by Chugach Electric. Chugach Electric provided a forecast just for their service area, and then using the counts on the number of residential commercial buildings in the Railbelt versus Chugach's territory, we extrapolated that to represent all of the Railbelt if all the Railbelt followed Chugach's trends, and then we extrapolated them out to 2050. Here we normalized the forecast to 2023, meaning the amount of heat pumps in the system at 2023 is 1. And then if in 2024, the number of heat pumps in, say, ISO New England doubled, the value would be 2. So it gives you the growth from 2023 on equal terms so that we can compare different regions that have different numbers of building stocks. And so what you're seeing here is that Chugach's aggressive forecast is high compared to the growth expected in New England, which is the blue, and the moderate is lower. Did I show more? Yeah. Okay. And so next, we'll show that we decided to, again, use Chugach's aggressive forecast for our moderate, given that even there's a number of factors that I did not include on these slides, but they're included in our report. There's reasons to believe that ISO New England, the New England states are farther ahead in their adoption of heat pumps than the Railbelt. And so when you're at the beginning of like your adoption curve, you could have faster adoption than later on. So like more people who are interested are going to install heat pumps early, and then it'll start to dwindle out as there's less people interested or who can afford heat pumps. So we opted to go with Chugach's aggressive for our moderate, and then our aggressive 90%, is up high here. And again, this is in terms of installed heat pumps. So getting into behind the meter solar. This is the net metering historical data, which is collected by Chris Pike at ACEP. And so black dots are the number of behind the meter solar customers, and then the installed capacity in terms of megawatts is the orange. And what you see here is it's around 5 kilowatts in installation. So we use these historical trends and compared our historical trends to the New England states. We're using New England a lot because they have a lot of great data, historical and forecasted out data. And they are not as cold, but a kind of cold region in comparison to Alaska, based off of other places we could have used. And so Alaska's historical, this is again normalizing this time to 2013. This is where the data goes back to, is 2013. So growth in behind the meter solar, say in 2014, if it's double that of 2013, you'll get a value of 2 on your y-axis. So you're looking at growth compared to values of installed solar in 2013. So Alaska is in black. And what's interesting is we're kind of middle of the pack of the New England states. Additionally, we looked at Hawaii as an example of they are very far ahead of basically the rest of the country on installation of rooftop solar. I think it's around like 60 or 70% of homes have rooftop solar. And so if you think of things as like a S-curve of adoption, adoption can be faster at the beginning, and then towards when you reach total adoption, the curve of adoption will kind of slow down. So Hawaii is kind of at the end of the curve. And so their growth in solar, because so many people already have it, it's going to be much lower. And then we're kind of middle of the pack of like compared to New England states, which is somewhat interesting, like in terms of growth rates historically in the last 10 years. So we use all this information to develop the forecast for behind the meter solar. And it's somewhat hard to see in this chart, but we assumed the growth that is displayed historically in the last couple of years is exponential growth. So what we opted to do is continue that exponential growth. I believe it's for 4 more years. And then after that, we went to linear growth based off of the last 3 years of that exponential growth. And then every 5 or 10 years or so, we halved the amount of linear growth. And that the years that we halved the amount of linear growth correspond to when the federal ITC tax credit, expires. And then there's estimates on solar costs. So as the solar cost started to decrease less in time, we decreased the linear growth of behind the meter solar. And so this steps its way to 2050. And so this is in terms of number of solar installations and installed capacity. We assumed based off of historical installations that each new installation will be about 5 kilowatts per building. And then 90% is way up here. And so what this looks like comparatively, so for the moderate adoption, we had 71% of vehicles electric, and then heat pumps, 14% of residential commercial homes had a heat pump, and similarly for solar, 18% of homes had behind the meter solar, and the aggressive adoption is 90% across the board. These are kind of illustrated plots to show what the impact to the hourly load demand looks like. So what you're looking at is, oh, I lost sorry. So this is for electric vehicles. This is the load draw from electric vehicles for every hour of every day for the year of 2050. So this is like January is 1.1, February is 2.1, and then in the y-axis we're talking megawatts of electric draw. So for perspective, the Railbelt peak load right now is like in the winter is around like 700 megawatts. So you can see, and these 3 different series represent the central, southern, and northern regions. So you can see if you add all these together to represent the whole Railbelt, you're over 700 megawatts at certain times in the year. So if you had, and this is for the moderate adoption, so it's about 70% of vehicles would be electric in this case. Just from the adoption of electric vehicles, following current trends to the best of our ability, you are doubling your peak load in winter. And I have some statistics in this slide to illustrate this. This is behind the yellow and orange is your behind the meter solar power generation. So this is negatively taking away from the load. And again, it's broken into regions. So you can see you're getting into the like 100 megawatts being removed from the load in the middle of the summer. And then the purple and pink plot are heat pump. And this much lower power draw addition.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
There. Okay, there we go. I was looking for the key, which is a little bit lower.
Yeah, they got cut off on the other slide. Sorry about that.
Got it. Thank you.
So
sorry, you said you're assuming what percentage electric vehicles?
So there's about 70% for the moderate.
And where are we at currently? Oh, sorry, thank you.
Let's see. Yeah, we're in like a couple of percent right now. Let's
Okay,
see.
thank you.
Yeah.
I do see some Teslas on the road, and I think I'm seeing more of them year on year.
Yeah. Yeah, so these are based off of trends that are available. And for the aggressive adoptions is 90% of everything, not necessarily realistic, but provides an illustration of like what would happen if you did have 90% adoption of all these technologies. And you see the amount of power demand that would increase, particularly both now due to heat pumps and electric vehicles, is very significant. And you do have very significant behind the meter solar production in the middle of the summer. So looking at total load, so this is looking at our current total load in 2021 and the forecasted load in 2050 for the moderate and aggressive load forecast. That includes the baseline load, heat pumps, and electric vehicles with the residential solar and commercial solar subtracted from it. This is how the total load would look comparatively to 2021. So 2021 is on the bottom. And you do have a doubling of the winter peak load for the moderate adoption, and then the summer low loads are kind of just a little bit higher than what normally is. So the scales of these plots are not the same, unfortunately. So I just highlighted that this is at 1600 and this is at 2500. And I put a line here on the aggressive of where that approximately where that moderate peak load from the plot on the left would lie on the plot on the right to give a comparison. So you're looking at 2 to 3 times the peak load in the winter, and you actually have lower loads in the summer than in present day. And this is because of the amount of behind the meter solar.
Because of the behind the meter solar. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what 90% would look like. And we've summarized the statistics on the hourly load data here. So total energy for these forecasts like doubles or almost triples. And here we showed the contribution of the energy of the different technologies that we forecasted. Peak load also doubles. I put little diamonds here just to know like these are wildly different. These are significant changes from the current system. So we have a doubling of peak load. In this aggressive adoption, we have a lower low load. And then also of note is the maximum hour-to-hour change. So this would impact the amount of like ramping resources you would need in the grid to be able to jump from 1 hour to hour. You need to be able to jump 200 megawatts. So in the lower 48, most utilities use natural gas generators to do really fast ramping, such as would be needed to like make a 200 megawatt jump. And that is because they're able to do that. They don't have like the contract and physical limitations that our current natural gas system has, and that's a different topic on its own. But this is just to illustrate this is a significant integration challenge, and this is purely from the load. This isn't even getting into variable renewables or anything like that yet. And then here's a summary of the number of heat pumps and electric vehicles.
Here we chase our variable with naphtha, that LM6000 out in North Pole.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
I would leave it to our GBEA reps to clarify if I'm wrong, but yeah, that's what we use.
Yeah, and this would be very significant. So I want to get into like, what does this mean? These are just forecasts and from models. Every model is incorrect. Maybe they're useful. We're not necessarily saying this is going to happen, but using following trends, this is kind of where the projections end up. And so this has massive implications for if this happened in this manner. It would have massive implications for resource planning, like generation and resource planning on the Railbelt, in terms of just like pure energy, and then also in terms of like ramping capabilities. And then at this point, you have to look at demand response programs if you're going to basically smooth out these significant jumps due to these new technologies. So there's highlights a lot of integration challenges. And what we are aiming to have is have this information available, including the hourly load data that we've estimated, so that other people who want to look at different trajectories can look at their own adoption rates that they think is realistic for their region or for the rail belt, and start to make use it as useful information for generation planning, whether or not they want to use these trends or forecasts or their own. This information is available to do that. So the data, the hourly load data and the forecasted year-to-year data is available. So where are we going from here? So we are in August 2023. We're going to have the load forecast presentation in September, and we're in the middle of primarily power system analysis. So all the grayed out blocks have been completed, and we're nearing the end. We're doing economic dispatch and power system stability. And so we'll be done in January. As part of this work, there's many different rabbit holes you could go down. You know, there's a wealth of information that we think would be useful to collect, and we only tackled a small portion of what needs to be tackled if you want to go down a decarbonization pathway. For example, the load forecast is something that really should be updated and improved every single year based off of like how things are changing. There's way more scenario combinations that could be done, perhaps ones that are more realistic. And then, of course, you need to get into transportation and heating, particularly with natural gas in South Central. There's a direct interdependency there between your heating and your electricity sector. We didn't do a whole lot in the looking at like hosting capacity of distributed energy resources. Like if you get above kind of like a certain number of megawatts on a feeder line, you're going to be impacting whether or not you have to upgrade your transformer, which costs money. And so this all plays into like how it impact rates or potentially policy implications. We did not get into policy implications from either the perspective of like, if this policy was put in place, how would it impact, say, load or generation, or vice versa? How could changes in the system kind of create a need for certain policies? We didn't look at that. And then, of course, there's wildlife and ecological implications of each of these resources and load changes that we're looking at that we speak to, that like these are challenges, but we're not digging into like what are the exact implications that would come from each of these resources. And of course, there's much more. And there's several working groups, including national labs and groups within the Railbelt utilities that are working on this, and they're also working on it for more like near term in like the next couple of years versus we went and jumped ahead to 2050. So there's a whole lot of information that needs to be gathered to get more detailed information on how would you actually get there in 2050.
So Phylicia, did you look at any, or is anybody looking at workforce requirements and constraints in these scenarios?
Not in our study. Other people at ACEP are looking into workforce training and transitions, but not in this study yet.
And then a similar question on resources, just the the bits and pieces. Are there likely to be constraints if we're doing this along with the rest of the nation? Are there likely to be constraints on the availability of electric cars or solar panels and that kind of thing?
Yes, particularly when you get to prices. So like battery energy storage, particularly, a decrease for many years. And then during the pandemic into now, you're kind of seeing due to supply chain issues, like a massive increase. So we're getting into how would resources be impacted by like other trends across the country in terms of cost, and what are cost projections? I don't know if that was what you're getting at.
Yeah, that's part of it. Thank you.
I see Miss Shepherd took herself or put her video on. I see Mr. Music has his hand up. You mind if we do ladies first, Mike? Cool. Miss Shepherd, please.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. It's got a lot of very substantive information. I'm appreciating it. And I'm wondering if maybe you could say more about which of the additional opportunities that you outlined you're anticipating moving forward with through ACEP.
I think there are people at ACEP that would love to do all of those things. We, at this moment, don't have funding for anything future. We have a couple of proposals in, including pretty much every topic that's listed. And like for the policy implications that we have a proposal in with Marie Lowe down at UAA, who does policy and works with people on policy on energy. And then we've talked with Todd Brickman in the wildlife department to look at wildlife environmental concerns. But as this moment, we don't have funding to do any future work, but hopefully that'll change.
Thank you.
Mr. Music, and then we will have Miss Peace.
Thank you. Great presentation. I would love to see the quantification of the impact of the various scenarios related to the air quality in the Fairbanks world. Has anyone attempted that?
No, we have not yet. I'm hoping we will get to it because we'll be looking at the carbon emissions, and that's directly related in Fairbanks to this. That's a good point.
And one other observation is that there's a rumor about that an investor from somewhere down in the northeastern United States is looking at using modern drilling technology to drill, say, straight down and then horizontally and come back up again, and then using critical liquids to spin a turbine. And that instead of looking at a great for geothermal, it's just maybe 3 or 4 miles from the location of the power plant. Have you looked into that at all?
No, I have not heard of this before. I'll have to check into it.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we got distracted. What did you reference, Mike? Something about geothermal?
A rumor, if you will. There's a drilling outfit in the lower 48 that has proposed that they just do using modern drilling technology.
Oh, I see.
To just drill a deep hole till it gets hot enough, and then they'll turn horizontally and come back up. And then they just have a closed loop.
Got it. Okay.
With some sort of critical liquids that has a different boiling point than water. And so therefore the steam, quote unquote, could spin a turbine. And in which case then they could drill right beside existing power plants and turn off the fossil fuels. It would always be there on standby, of course, but then have emissions-free electricity.
Got it. Well, and we did have a presentation from Westinghouse regarding their long-term thermal storage, which was meant to take the spillover energy from variable sources. I just can't remember if it ever got hot enough to spin turbines. I mean, I'm assuming that was part of the point. But again, another way to take variable sources and help them transition over to acting more like base load sources. Miss Peace, you had your hand up. Are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you so very much. Jomo, and also the presenter, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Since the title is Decarbonization, I'm wondering if any analysis was done on the utilization of lower carbon emissions. For example, if LNG were to replace coal or diesel, and it was used for generating electricity, wouldn't that be part of a
You're breaking up a little bit, Marianne, but I think we got it.
Reduction goal as well, and
Hmm.
thoughts on that?
Yes, so because we were looking at 100% decarbonization, we weren't looking at technologies to kind of get us part of the way there. That's where like the folks who are really looking at, the next couple of years decarbonization goals, are definitely, I believe, looking at that. However, I will say in like lower carbon fuels, we are looking at like injecting hydrogen into some of our existing natural gas turbines, and we are looking at carbon capture, just due to there are integration challenges in some of our scenarios if you turn off all the natural gas generators or all the coal due to stability challenges. So in some cases, we are looking at keeping them on, but using a combination of hydrogen and carbon capture to ideally remove all the carbon emissions. So LNG is still included along with those technologies.
Well, and relative to hydrogen, again, right now we talk about ammonia. Again, it's really is a carrying mechanism for hydrogen because it's probably more fungible. I mean, hydrogen is just a really small molecule, so it's harder to handle and containerize. But then I'm also thinking peroxide. I mean, they were actually trying to fly jets off of peroxide during World War II. Again, just another, neither one have carbon. I mean, what ammonia is NH3 and peroxide is just really, it's just OH, it's water. Oh well. But again, we're trying to figure out I think as a species, we're trying to figure out the hydrogen conundrum. Mr. DeLong, I saw that you saw yours had taken or put your video on. Did you have a question, sir? Did we lose him? Did he give up? Okay. All right. Well,
I'm here. I did not have a question. I'm just not very technically savvy.
Okay, sir. Good to see you, Mr. Chair. Oh, let's see. Comments. Let's check it out. Yeah, natural gas still produces, Ms. Baroff, still produces greenhouse gases.
From Jay Reasoner.
Sure. Ever Technologies out of Calgary professes to be able to do what Mr. Music was mentioning. There are others that are looking at non-aquifer based geothermal solutions. Awesome. Now, of course, there ain't no happiness nowhere and everything comes with a cost. I mean, part of the human-made industrial scale geothermal is we'll be draining the heat out of the core. And I don't know what that might do to us in a million years, but there we have it. Okay. Well, everybody, Doc, this has been great. This really has been a great presentation, a wonderful way to take us off of our summer break from energy meetings. Really appreciate it. We are near the top of the hour. But again, Doc, if you have an extra moment, I would open up the floor for any final questions or comments. Mr. Music, I see you've taken yourself off mute.
Yeah, I just am observing this last slide here. They look like bifacial panels installed vertically. And I understand that they're able to generate quite a bit of power year round. Could you go into that at all, please?
Sure. Yeah, it's not my area of research, but Chris Pike, Michelle Wilbur, they work on solar. And so these are actually at right in front of UAF. And there's a north, south, and east, west facing, and you're right there, bifacial. And they generate some pretty cool like power generation curves that like overlap nicely, particularly in like the spring, including spring, summer, and fall, where you get a much smoother power generation curve. I believe this is what I remember. If you want all the details, you just talk to Chris. But I believe like the total energy out might be a little less than if, say, you were just facing your bifacial and just facing one direction. But if you do the north, south, and the east, west, you get a little less power generation total, but you get a smoother curve for longer. But yeah, I'd reach out to Chris Pike. They do some really cool stuff on bifacial.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, ladies, any questions from the room? Okay, very well. Do we have any further questions or comments online?
Jomo, I've got one question that you may have an answer for actually, but I'll put it out to the group anyway. Just if folks are looking for current behind the meter metrics, like feasibility, to determine feasibility, cost savings, et cetera, what is the best source? Where do you point people? Any idea?
Actually, I would kick that over to you, Doc. Where do you go?
I go to Michelle Wilbur. She works in beneficial and equitable electrification, so she gets into all of the like cost and tax credit information, and I believe she works with Chris Pike works with the Solarize campaign. I believe they have a lot of good information. But at ACEP, I go to Michelle Wilbur.
Yeah, I was going to say Solarize. Okay, excellent.
Just so you know, the Railbelt utilities all have to report to the RCA every year annually. They're behind the meter solar statistics. So the RCA reports from the utilities is the current information updated annually.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Okay. All right. Well, I believe that brings us to the end of the meeting. Again, Dr. Cicilio, thank you so much for your presentation and frankly for your work. So I'll be reaching back out to see if we can't get on the presentation list for top of next year for when the publicly available information is publicly available. All right. Well, beyond that, guys, as always, I just hope everybody has a good rest of their Tuesday, a good rest of their week. I don't actually have anything lined up as yet, but again, I'll be reaching out, doing reach outs, and I'll notify everybody when our next presentations are and all that good stuff. All right, but as always, I guess I would throw one more plug. Again, last plug for, not last plug, but do be reminded of the Alaska Defense Forum happening the last week of August. Tickets are still available, as well as sponsorship opportunities if you want to both support the event, but also get some good public facing time. And then, yeah, wait, there was one other thing. Oh, well, I'm drawing a blank again. Oh, yes, I was going to say, if you have any recommendations for presentations or requests for things you'd like to see as we move through into and through the fall, just go ahead and reach out and I'll make those further reach outs. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and we'll see you here soon at the Energy for All Alaska Task Force.